Okay, this is the December 16th meeting of the District Operations Committee, and we need a roll call.
Good morning. Director Ranjiv Kush,
Here.
Director Sampson,
Here.
Director Jed Smith,
Present.
Vice President Schmidt,
Present.
President Russell.
Here. Okay, I need a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Any public comment on the agenda?
There are none.
Roll call, please.
Director Kush,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt,
Aye.
President Russell.
Aye. Any public comment on items not on the agenda?
There are none.
Okay. We need update on the capital improvement program.
Good morning, directors. Crystal Yasmin, Director of Engineering. I know we've been giving the
Crystal
new
really quickly. I think we failed to adopt the minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got
Yeah.
the agenda right. You're correct. I did. We need a motion to approve the minutes. Of the
So
moved.
Second.
Okay, and a roll call.
Director Kush,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt,
Aye.
President Russell.
Aye. Okay, Crystal, you're on.
Okay, sure. I know we've been giving the new directors sort of the fire hose approach of information on capital program lately with a couple of briefings, but today we are giving that briefing in public at this meeting to get everybody up to speed on where we are with our capital program. And I'm going to hand it over to Alicia Irish to give a presentation.
Good morning, directors. Good morning, everyone. Alicia Irish here, engineering manager. Today, I'll be providing a presentation on our capital improvement program. This morning, we'll be starting with an overview of our capital assets. We'll then give a brief review of our financial plan and the process that took place in early 2021. We'll also be discussing our historical and current capital investment and how that capital funding will be part of the upcoming budget development and rate setting process. Our water system is comprised of 7 reservoirs, and we have a vast array of infrastructure that takes place all over our service area. It's comprised of 3 water treatment plants, 128 storage tanks, 95 pump stations, and 900 miles of pipe that has an estimated replacement value of about $2 to $3 billion. We'll be going into each of these asset classes in more detail later on in this presentation. But I also wanted to touch upon another critical piece of our water district, our watershed, which is the source of about 75% of our water supply, has about 150 miles of roads and trails, almost 22,000 acres of publicly accessible land, and is home to 400 animal species and about 1,000 plant species. Now, getting into detail into some of those asset classes, we have about 900 miles of potable pipe in our system. About a third of that is comprised of cast iron. A little less than half is welded steel. And then the remainder is comprised of about 10 different pipeline materials. The average age of the pipe in our system is about 47 years, and about 93 miles are 75 years or older. The pipeline that we install today is primarily welded steel or PVC pipeline material, and it has an estimated useful life of about 100 years. The majority of the pipe in our system was installed, in the 1950s or 60s. As you can see in these orange bars in the cast iron, that represents over 200 miles of pipe in our system. And we can reasonably assume that this has less of an estimated useful life. The photo on the left here shows a 65-year-old cast iron pipe in Fairfax that failed prior to its expected life. When cast iron pipe fails, it tends to fail catastrophically, as you can see in this large split in the photo. And it's approaching the end of its useful life, in that in 10 years, most of the cast iron pipe in our system will be 75 years or older. Moving on to our storage tanks. We have 128 storage tanks in our system. Most of them are comprised of some form of steel. We have 65 welded steel tanks in our system, 36 bolted tanks, and 8 riveted tanks. We also have some concrete, hydropneumatic, redwood tanks, and 1 plastic tank in our system. The chart on the right here shows the material type of each tank and either the decade that it was installed or that it was last recoated. We have the opportunity for our welded steel and riveted tanks to recoat them cyclically to extend their useful life. The recommended recoating interval for these tanks is about 20 to 25 years. And we have 39 tanks that are overdue for recoating in 2023. The cost to recoat a 1 million gallon tank in our system is about $1.5 million. So we have some opportunities for investment in our storage tank asset class. These are some examples of some of our tank refurbishment needs. These 2 photos show our Wolfback Ridge tank, which is a tank that is installed in the hills of Sausalito and was installed in 1997. And while this tank is only 25 years old, it does present an example that some of our assets may fail prior to that. And higher investment, or investing further in our storage tanks and recoating more cyclically, will allow these projects to maintain as recoating projects, as opposed to increase into major tank replacement jobs. Along our watershed, we do have some major initiatives taking place. The main one being our fire and fuels management program, which is implemented through our biodiversity fire and fuels integrated plan. We spend about $3 million of this. We invest about $3 million of this on this program annually, with funding coming from our capital program, operating program, as well as outside grants. Another major initiative is our culvert replacement program. And in this program, we're aiming to replace about 100 failing culverts within our system. Many of these culverts were not designed to sustain our peak winter flow and are failing. It's critical to replace these culverts, as many of these culverts lie under emergency access routes or under major transmission lines. Also on our watershed, we're performing habitat restoration as well as road and trail improvements. Moving on to treatment plants. We have 3 treatment plants in our system. The big one being our San Geronimo treatment plant, which is located out in West Marin with a sustainable capacity of about 28 million gallons per day. We also have the Bontempi treatment plant located on our watershed with a sustainable capacity of 16 million gallons per day. And finally, our Ignacio pump station, which is in Novato, which receives the water that we get from the Russian River. And that has a sustainable capacity of 12 million gallons per day. There are a number of investment opportunities that staff sees that we can make in our treatment plants. The primary one being the replacement of our clarifiers. The 3 clarifiers in our system, 2 at San Geronimo and 1 at Bontempi, currently lack lateral resistance and have the same design that was in the Rinconada water treatment plant clarifier that's located in the South Bay and is part of Valley Water. You can see in the photo on the right that the arms to the clarifier sustained significant damage after the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989.
Those are actually the launderers, Alicia,
Oh, excuse me.
that collapsed. That they ran across to the center, but they fell in.
And so we see this as a great opportunity to invest to increase the seismic reliability of our treatment plants.
And Alicia, could you speak a moment about what lateral support means, earthquake?
Yes, so our
We've got
clarifier,
non-engineers here.
sorry, I didn't quite hear that last part.
I said they're non-engineers.
Yes, so our clarifiers are, you can see in the photo on the left, they're circular in design. And in the event of a large earthquake, the water will start to slosh and cause large waves. And that could cause the collapse of the inner circle that you see in the center of those clarifiers. Causing those to fail would enable us to no longer be able to treat water at these treatment plants, and which is critical to providing water to our customers every day. So it's imperative that we invest to increase the seismic reliability of these facilities. Moving on to our final asset class, pump stations. We have 95 pump stations in our system with an average age of 55 years. Most of our pump stations have 2 pumps in them for a total of 178 pumps. The table on the left shows their pumps by age. These pumps have an average age of 40 years. The photo on the right is our Sausalito pump house. And this photo is fairly representative of many of the pump stations in our system. This pump station was constructed in 1962. And you can see that it's in need of modern equipment, increased resiliency, as well as a more modern design. Now that we have reviewed the state of our capital assets, we're going to talk about the process that took place to develop our 10-year financial plan. This plan was conducted across 5 different workshops between December 2020 and May 2021, and was developed in concert with our board, as well as engagement from the community. This plan examined a range of levels of investment in both our capital and operating programs. 4 different scenarios were developed across our asset classes, and these scenarios were evaluated against resource availability. Ultimately, the board selected a hybrid scenario, which we'll be getting into detail on in the next slide or 2. The 4 scenarios that were developed were the baseline scenario, maintaining system reliability, moving towards resilience, as well as a contemporary and proactive scenario. These scenarios are all additive, meaning that they build upon each other. The moving towards resilience scenario incorporates both the baseline scenario as well as maintaining reliability, in addition to additional projects. You can see the 2 columns on the right show the total investment over the 10-year period, as well as the additional cost over and above the baseline. Like I mentioned, ultimately the board ended up selecting a hybrid option, which incorporates individual projects selected from the reliability, resilience, and contemporary scenarios, and all build upon the baseline CIP program. This scenario includes an investment of an additional $175.5 million over and above our baseline program.
Alicia, excuse me, this is
Yes.
Ranjit. I'm wondering, in the scenario planning, are there, I don't know if there are opportunities to include efficiency upgrades or recent technical innovations that would improve the performance, reduce the operating costs of our infrastructure. I'm not sure if there are big opportunities in those respects, but I'm just wondering if if there are possibilities for, if those were evaluated in conjunction with the the capital, just the maintenance activities.
Well, I will say within our baseline CIP, we are always looking to optimize efficiency when we do replacements on pump stations. And that's definitely something that we consider in terms of energy efficiency. So I would say that's incorporated inherently in our baseline CIP program. But there's also individual projects that are within the various scenarios that also improve efficiency to our water district. some of which were selected into the hybrid option and some of which remained in the scenarios. I will say that the 10-year plan is also an iterative process. But that the board did end up selecting and recommending this hybrid option. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, very much. Alicia, thank you. And seeing AMI within the hybrid option, for example, I think that's an example of where technical advances are being incorporated into the operations that will hopefully, provide long-term
Rajiv-
efficiency gains.
Ranjiv, if I could, a couple other projects that are currently ongoing that are efficiency projects in a way would be installing VFDs at our Castania pump station. It's a phase 2 project that's in design to improve that pump station. And
Crystal, so VFDs may be a term of art.
oh, sorry. Variable frequency drive. Currently, the motors are either on or off, full throttle. And when you have a variable frequency drive, you can ramp it up slowly to meet the demand. So it's more efficient for electrical use and consumption. And then another project that we have going right now is with UC Davis. We're actually looking at inline micro hydro and where in our system that could be installed to produce electricity.
And just, again, a little clarity, inline hydropower, basically you're putting very small turbines in the pipe in areas where you have excess head or pressure. So you can capture that with these small inline turbines and still probably even maybe be better situated because you don't need that much pressure. And so we're looking at what areas in the system may be good candidates.
But I think you have to go one step further, Ben, because conventionally a device called a pressure reducing valve was used for this, which is just a mechanical head loss put into the flow by squeezing it down to create friction and knocking off the excess head. For instance, where I live in Tiburon, we're at the bottom of a hill with the tank on the top of the hill, Ring Mountain, and we get 135 PSI served to our homes. So every home where I live has a PRV, a pressure reducing valve, at the house. Now, a low head hydro would be cute, but it really wouldn't fit in because we don't produce enough power to make it useful. But where Ben's talking about is getting rid of that old thinking technology, which is the PRV, just grind the pressure off mechanically by taking advantage of using the low head hydro to get some useful power back. That it's the same energy we're talking about. One case we just burn it off into heat. The other one we burn it off into energy, into usable energy.
Yes, and I can honestly say that a water district is one of the largest electrical users in the county of Marin because of all of our pump stations. So electrical efficiency is an important aspect of improvements to our pump
We're
stations.
not just one of them, we are the largest user
We
of
are.
power in Marin.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much for that clarification on the micro hydro testing. Maybe the last question, Crystal, Alicia's, are there advances in SCADA that allow for more efficient operations? For example, ensuring that pumping is occurring primarily during low times of low rate, or calibrating pumping to demand more carefully. Are there things that can be done there as well?
Yes, we actually already do that. We do pump up at night to top off our tanks for morning demand, and we look at opportunities for when the cost of electricity is cheaper at different times. We also have a program with the state of California where when there's going to be excess power consumption, say during hot weather events, there's a third-party agreement with an agency where they pay us to not run our pump stations in order to take energy off of the grid.
your question is also an opportunity for others. SCADA, you obviously know, but for the public, SCADA is probably the most important equipment we have in our system. It is our remote operations and monitoring tool that, through communication devices allows all of our remote sensors to be seen by our operations staff in numerous different areas, as well as controlling the system manually or in automatic. So, most of these valves is motor operated valves, and, you see your level in the tanks and system, and it's largely an automated system that has alarms and monitoring and all of that. And it'd be interesting for the new board members when there's an opportunity to bring you to the treatment plant or the distribution center here and see the array of computers that with staff operate our facilities.
Thank you, Ben. My last question on this is remote water quality monitoring. Do we have any remote monitors for water quality components that provide maybe advanced warning of potential concerns?
Oh, certainly. I mean, we measure chlorine through online monitors, temperature. We use it to dictate tank levels. If chlorine, the residence time in a tank, the chlorine can dissipate over time. So it'll help us determine whether or not a tank needs to be lowered and refilled and cycled. So yeah, we certainly have. And then at the treatment plants, there's much more complex instrumentation, as you can guess, that's tied into the control center there.
Great. Yeah, it'd be great to be able to see some of that in operation at some point. Thank you.
So going into detail on the hybrid option of our 10-year plan, ultimately the board ended up selecting 10 projects that were incorporated in the various scenarios. These projects ended up resulting in an additional $175 million over the baseline CIP for the 10-year period. These projects are the North Marin Line, which is a transmission line that feeds San Geronimo Treatment Plant from Suluhuli, Nicasio, and Kent Lakes. This is the sole transmission line feeding that treatment plant. So if this line were to fail, we would be unable to treat water at San Geronimo. This project proposes to replace pipe from the bottom of Kent Lake towards the top of White's Hill for a total of 7 miles of pipe. We also have selected seismic retrofits that could take place on some of our storage tanks. The replacement of our Smith Saddle tanks, which are 2 5 million gallon tanks in the hills of Fairfax. An increase in tank recoating for an additional 12 tanks over our baseline CIP across the 10-year period. Structure hardening of 20 pump stations to increase their resiliency in the event of a wildfire. The replacement of our clarifiers at the San Geronimo Treatment Plant. Additional wildfire preparedness along our watershed. Enhanced conservation. Full-scale implementation of AMI, or automated meter infrastructure, as well as the reinstatement of our valve exercising program.
Alicia, can I ask a quick question on that last one?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Matt.
Okay, thanks, Judd. The enhanced conservation of $40 million, what does that build upon under the base level for the CIP?
So this enhanced conservation, so the 10-year financial plan looked at both increased investments to our capital program as well as operating elements. So I'll kind of start there as that base. But the enhanced conservation would increase the available rebates and incentives provided to our customers to encourage a sustainable conservation rate. And then it could also possibly provide some meters across our infrastructure to incorporate a mass balance, so we could better monitor our water loss within our own system. So it's really to encourage and create a more sustainable conservation rate as we go forward into climate change.
No, great. And I think it's really important. Maybe the question I have is how much in our current investment level goes to conservation?
Yeah, I think the question, Alicia, was
Oh.
how much of an increase if we look at this 4 million a year generally over our budgeted conservation? I don't know if we have those numbers on our, or we'll get back to the board. on
Yeah, I
that.
think I'll need to get back to you on that.
Yep, no problem. Thank you.
Great.
Well, I'd also like to add, we did, speak with Carrie Pollard and Paul Sellier in regards to how this compares to the water supply assessment and the level of investment that's being recommended. It's achievable in those scenarios. And this level of investment is a little bit higher than what was proposed in the strategic water supply assessment. And we can get into the details of it during the next update for that.
All right.
Great. Thanks, Crystal.
It is a very good point. As we've talked about, the strategic water supply assessment is capturing the slice of the pie of conservation that we're confident in, that we can subtract that amount from the water we're pursuing for supplemental supply. This is a broader, larger program that includes education and kind of innovative approaches to conservation, not necessarily with water that we can count in context of a water supply planning effort, but reflects our ethos and interest to keep building a really world-class conservation program.
Also, Ben, I think it's critical to look at this slide very carefully. The first line shows what would happen at our current levels of expenditures over the 10 years, which is we spend 272 million. So the approval that the board made is to move us to 448, basically almost doubling the annual expenditure.
Yeah, and I did want to let me just speak to that, because it's coming across as it was a very formal kind of board decision. And we're calling it a board decision. I think it's more of a consensus outcome of the planning effort is perhaps a better way to capture it.
I would agree with that.
Yes,
I'm not
think-
sure that I guess I would have to say, I'm not sure that I share that a little bit. I think that these are, that our 10-year planning process was really wrestling with some really significant issues that I think Alicia has really highlighted for us here. We have a significant backlog of maintenance that has been a primary concern of mine in the 2 years that I've been on the board, that these are some big numbers, that we have some big needs. Just looking at our number of tanks, that 39 tanks that need a recoding at 1.5 million a piece. These are some significant investments that we need to catch up on. And I'd like to see something I've asked for about our 10-year plan is I look at this amount of investment, of additional investment in our capital maintenance, and it looks substantial. It's like an 80% increase over our current level of investment, and that is on an annual basis, and that sounds and seems very significant. But I'd ultimately really like to see how this is going to reduce our overall estimated backlog of maintenance. So just if we look at what would cost us today to be able to come up to modern industry standards of replacement, and where will we be in 10 years? Will we have taken that number down by 20%, 25, 50%? I think it's important to understand this because we need to track progress. But I think we also need to see how much of a dent are we really making? Knowing that also with every passing year, everything is aging another year. So I just think that this is a really important step that we're taking. We need to take it significantly because of this cost, and with our cost of service analysis, for which this is going to need to be included in the calculations. So I would like us to, I'd like to see a little bit more presentation on the numbers of how this will leave us if, you know, we stay on this path in 10 years.
Monty, I fully agree. You know, I think it's important to put some real context behind why we're making these investments, the return on these investments, and the problems that would happen if we don't do them. And some things that come out to me are really as an example of how far behind we are right now and how absolutely critical this is just to get us back up to speed. This is not like massive investment in the future. This is trying to catch up. So Smith Saddle to me is a microcosm of this entire plan, where we could have spent $1 million 8 years ago to save 24 today. And so if I'm thinking about these other recoding efforts and these other investments where we're trying to catch up, how much are we saving if we don't do it? And it's going to be significant, right? If we don't do this, then we're falling way behind. We're digging a hole deeper for the future. Same with AMI to me. I mean, AMI, we're 10 years behind. I mean, Nevada's had AMI for years and many other places. I mean, this is a way for us to get into the 21st century and to get data so that we can be super thoughtful about the uses of water, where the issues are, how we can conserve, how we can educate people about what's happening. So for me, these are all critical. We have to get there, and it's all just a matter of how do we get it funded? How do we make sure that we have the funding in this organization to get us hopefully, where we probably should have been several years ago. So I'll do everything I can to help make that happen.
Jed, your thinking's in the right way, but Smith Saddle is a bad example. The real problem in Smith Saddle was the decision at the beginning to put in the steel tanks. So what's being changed here is a completely different concrete tank to get rid of the steel tanks, to get rid of future maintenance in part. That decision could have been made when they were put in, but the district was pretty cheap in its thinking, decided to put steel tanks in, and then not necessarily keep the maintenance at the level it should have been. But in answering Monty's question, you can see that 12 of the tanks, that's a perfect example, Monty, of where we are. You're asking a question, you said there's 36 or 39 or whatever there were, and 12 of them are being done. So about a third of them are being done. We have some data here to see where we are. You don't have to harden pump stations after they've been hardened the first time. So, and the same with the clarifier. The clarifier issue is, in my opinion, actually a design fault of the original consultant. It's way out of the statute of limitations on that, but we happen to, as Alicia said, have the same clarifiers that Santa Clara Valley had, the ones that collapsed in the Loma Prieta earthquake. So
Monty, I just wanted to come back because you have brought this up a few times, and I do think, well, we will do it. I just wanted to reflect that tanks, it's very clear, are we behind and how do we catch up and where do we stand? Some of these other elements, of course, like the clarifiers, that's a different probabilistic, calculation in terms of risk and benefit. And then probably the hardest is pipes, because their underground condition isn't easy, but you can figure that out. We have some cast iron pipes in the ground that are over 100 years old and in relatively good shape. And then we have some failing early, and we'll be bringing all this to the board. So really on pipes, you kind of just get, and we would bring options to the board into a mindset of how many miles per year are you going to do? And you just pick the, based on, risk analysis, likelihood of failure and consequences, and then the city street work. So anyway, we do hear you, and I think we can put together a little better what you're asking for.
Thank you, Ben. I mean, listen, I have 100% faith that you and our staff know how to prioritize our assets that are at most at risk, that have the best return on investment, like the example that Jed provided, which is if we can spend $1 million now, we save, multiple millions, if we wait. I trust us to be able to prioritize correctly. I think that the thing is that when it comes down to it, when we're trying to explain again, sort of what we are, where we are at fiscally for our community,
Right.
for our attending public, they can't understand, are those 12 tanks all 1.5, or are those 12 tanks the more expensive ones that are even larger? That kind of detail, I think, is something we can dive into if folks want it. But just simply understanding that in 10 years, we're going to take
Right.
whatever our backlog of maintenance is, if it's $200 million, I'm just making that number up, I don't know what it is, and say, and in 10 years, it will be 1.5, it'll be 150 million. We can explain to folks our investment is closing that gap, and that is measurable, meaningful progress. And I just want us to be able to break down things in simple terms, as well as be able to, of course, talk about these things in detail.
Sounds good.
If I could just touch upon the tanks and pipes. While this 10-year financial plan does include the recoding of 12 additional tanks for an average cost of about $1.5 million per tank, this would take our deficit from 39 tanks that are currently overdue for recoding down to 35. And that's largely due to the fact that there are a number of tanks that are close to being overdue. So in this 10-year period, they will cross that threshold. So even doing this additional 12 tanks, it will reduce our deficit, but it will take it from 39 tanks only to 35.
This is exactly the point, Alicia, which I think I was trying to make, and I don't want to belabor it, is that with every passing year, everything gets a year older. So this is where we're at today. You can't make the assumption that 12 takes us down from 39 to 27 because of the very fact. So this is where I think being able to have something that tells us how, not the number of projects, because there's new ones that'll come on next year and the year after, but where are we at, just cumulatively when we look at the overall cost of what our maintenance.
But understand, Monty, that these are not hard numbers.
I know,
These are
but we
just
can
rules
estimate
of
it. That's
thumb.
all.
That's what the average recoding period is. What matters is what's the coating period on our tanks, not what the average is. That's our.
So, and I think per what Monty's been looking for, what we want is that we need hard numbers. We need to move a real 10-year plan and hopefully make some real decisions and to invest.
Right. And Monty, I don't think you're belaboring the point. I'm concerned with one step forward, two steps back when we are in 10 years. It would be good to see these numbers, which didn't make the cut, kind of the below the line ones to get to there, and see where those would put us if we address them in the next 10 years.
So this is great feedback from the board. I think what we'll be doing in part to address this is bring back kind of a presentation that goes through in the 10-year plan, kind of a refresher of what we did that really shows the big picture in these different buckets, as well as bringing what Monty's trying to capture. And then lastly, just to share, and we'll be talking more to the board about this probably at the retreat. We're looking at, it's very interesting, a model of an agency that developed, in addition to the 10-year plan for their capital program, a 20 and 30-year plan. And those are updated at less frequency. But anyway, I really like the idea because the scope of what we're looking at, 10 years is maybe too narrow of a window to appreciate the full. So anyway, we'll be talking more about all these ideas with the board.
Ben, just one other item there. This conversation is so intensely focused on the state of our infrastructure and ensuring that we can bring it up to the best level possible. Yet the single largest line item in the plan is for conservation. I don't want to by any means diminish the importance of demand management and the most thoughtful utilization of our resources through conservation. But is this the place for conservation funding in our capital maintenance plan? It just,
Yeah.
it strikes me as it's odd or confusing, but then again, maybe this is the best. I just like that confirmation.
Yeah, I think there's different perspectives and, this is, at the time, there was interest to think about investments in conservation in a similar way. I would say typically, more traditionally, conservation is looked at as an operating expense, and there's various debates on either side. I think having it in here, what it does do, and we'll break it down as we break all these down for the board, it does signal to the public that our commitment for conservation is ever present and always there. And I think that was part of the interest too, because we're talking about such big dollars. But I have heard you on that, and I do think we need to break it down better, and we'll be doing that.
Yeah, I just hope it's not going to detract from our investments in infrastructure, in a significant way. So, but thank you for that, Ben.
I'd
Yeah,
also
I think it's an interesting question because the whole purpose of it being there came from trying to change the concept of how you pay for conservation. So that it is a form of capital improvement, if you think about it, because you spend the money, you make the change, and it reduces the demand, as you said, Rajiv. So that is the thinking of why it's in this list. But the part I think we're not feeling here, and be sure you do take away from this, is we got to pay for this, and that is the secondary part of what's going on here, is that this is doubling our capital improvement budget per year, more or less. So that's going to have a direct impact on rates.
I'd also like to note that within the baseline current investment level, there's $2 million per year being budgeted to implement the water supply roadmap, going towards funding for planning, environmental review, and pre-design. But additional funds will be required for full design and construction for any of the projects that we do decide to implement as a result of this roadmap. So those are not included currently in the hybrid option for the 10-year financial plan and would require additional investment. This chart here shows an illustrative schedule of how these 10-year plan projects could be laid out, noting that these are in addition to and above and beyond the baseline CIP program. Some of these projects that are identified in the hybrid option do present high potential to aggressively pursue grants, which we do intend to do as these grants become available. This gives us a good leeway into discussing our historical and current capital improvement investment. Over the last 10 years, we've invested a total of $217 million into our capital program. Annual expenditures range from $16 million to $26 million. In fiscal year 23, which is the year that we are currently in, we plan to spend about $25 million, 14 of which would come to our capital maintenance fee. Some of our capital maintenance fee, about $5 million, has been allocated towards debt service for this current year. But we've been able to fill the gap to achieve a $25 million planned expenditure through the use of $7.5 million of expenditures from our Fire Flow Reserve Fund, as well as $3.5 million that we've been fortunate to secure in grants or state appropriations. Of these $25 million that we plan to spend, there are 10 larger projects that we anticipate to cost over $1 million each, 15 smaller projects, as well as capital maintenance at a little over $3 million of expenditures. Capital maintenance is comprised of the replacement of large equipment or vehicles, and it typically comprises about 15 to 20% of our annual capital expenditures. This photo on the right is the Conifer Upper Pump Station, which is located directly adjacent to the Smith Saddle tanks. It was installed in 2019, and it shows a good example of modern equipment, telemetry, fire resiliency, as well as increased redundancy and reliability. While the board selected increased investment as part of our 10-year plan, subsequent to that plan, we did fall into a drought. So instead of increasing investment, we did have to reduce our baseline CIP expenditures due to associated conservation as well as reduction in revenue. $20 million of our CIP fund balance, as well as $5 million of our capital maintenance fee for this year, has gone towards debt service. And it's resulted in additional $10 million of additional delayed projects or capital maintenance. And as we think about moving forward with these fiscal challenges, we are looking towards outside funding, such as grants or debt funding, to pursue some of these key large investments. We've gone into some of the details on them when we talked about the exact projects that were in the hybrid option, but we will be going into more detail of these projects as we go forward in our rate setting process. In summary, we do have a very active CIP program with ongoing investments to maintain our water system reliability. Due to sustained conservation and reduced water sales, our capital investment has been reduced due to $5 million of our capital maintenance fee and $20 million of our capital fund balance going towards debt service. To help fill this gap, we plan to aggressively pursue outside funding. Since July 2020, we have received $30 million in grant, state and federal funding appropriations, and low interest loans. And we currently have over $60 million in applications, including $22 million for the Pine Mountain Tunnel Tank Replacement Project and $28 million for supplemental water supply. We will be considering various levels of capital funding, including a potential bond issuance as part of this rate setting process. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Just a quick question, on that last slide, I can't help but getting a little excited about all the money that we're bringing in from the state and the federal government. And I wonder to what extent whether we could do some kind of projection of what if we just went after every state grant, every federal program that we could. I mean, I'm not saying that we aren't, and maybe we already are, but right now that strikes me as such a big opportunity to help reduce our expenses and bring in dollars to the district. Are we able to go after all the grant programs that we think are out there? Do we have any sort of idea of how much of our capital maintenance might be a fit with state and federal grant programs?
Yeah, so I believe it's the next board meeting in January. We're going to be bringing a detailed update on our grant program. And I'm hoping we're going to be able to say that we are going after every single federal and state grant program that we're eligible for. And we're going to lay all of them out and what we're doing and thinking, and the board's going to hear that we're moving forward even on projects, water supply projects for grants in advance of the roadmap, because we have the opportunities now. And right, the board will always have decisions whether or not to accept the grant and move forward. So you're going to hear all that, where we are, what we're doing, and it's really a lot of activity, and we're making some good headway, and there's a lot out there. I think the challenge is how we would assume success in some way. So we'll get into all that.
Yeah, Ben, on that point, when you do present the analysis of the grant process, some information on how competitive these are, the history of actually succeeding in grant applications, and any indicators of how likely we are to receive the money would be, as you said, so critical for understanding
Right.
how much we can rely on them.
Yeah. I mean, there's like a great FEMA grant for Pine Mountain Tunnel, and we think we hit all the right boxes and talking to staff. Yet at the end of the day, there's a decision behind closed doors. But anyway, we will go through that. Yes. Okay. Larry, do we want to?
Move forward.
Hang on. I'm sorry. Ben,
Hang on.
what did you ask?
Go ahead.
Quiet.
Tell you what, let me hang out.
I'm
Maybe I
sorry, Ben.
The public comment?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you. We have a few speakers, and I just would like to kindly remind the public that you have 3 minutes to begin your speech. So the first three, Larry Minikes, RER, and then Ed Jamison. Go ahead, Mr. Minikes.
Well, good morning and thank you for the presentation. And I would like to suggest a programmatic approach be taken here, and that you take all 120 tanks, all 95 pumps, your 3 water treatment plants, your pipes. You lay it out on one large timeline spreadsheet all the way out to 2045. You can look at what needs to be done in every 5-year period. You can then budget for this well ahead of time, because you're going to know in 5 years X tank needs this, X pump needs to be replaced, and it would be a much more integrated approach to this, rather than putting up a slide. We've got to spend 20 million on these 5 tanks here, here, and here, and you can actually look at everything on one sheet and know where to go. So I would suggest finer detail be brought to the board and to the public, and I think it would be a much more successful way going forward, rather than this option on maintenance, which it's been just the past board. For previous boards going way back, should we do a tank? No, we got other expenses. Let's put it off. Let's put it off. Let's put it off. And then you see something like Smith Saddle or these other issues that we have that should have never happened in the first place. Thank you.
So why don't you speak to what the CIP looks like? This is not the CIP that we just showed. But talk about the document that Larry's looking for, which backs it up.
Yeah, last time we tried to give you that document, Director Russell, you told us that it was too much information in small typeset. It's so complicated. But yes, we do have all that information available, and we do look at it and try to factor in the replacement costs with the timeline and the age of the asset and the criticality. But we also look at the probability of the failure, because some are in worse condition than others. So actual age won't necessarily be the deciding factor. And then also the consequence of failure for that asset. So yeah, we've done quite a bit of work on it, and we'd be more than happy to bring a much longer, more in-depth discussion on it to a public meeting.
I think the more critical issue is to distribute it to the board so they can see it than it is whether we present it or not. I think the summary is fine in presentation, but we need to make sure that people are aware that this other document exists.
I think this sounds right in line and maybe even echoing to some degree what Ben mentioned in terms of other water districts that create 20 and 30 year budget timeframes. And I'm a big fan of spreadsheets that summarize things. Being able to throw something out on a timeline that does highlight, of all our assets, maybe it's a very long, spreadsheet with all the years going forward, but it would be a way to sort of be able to see where all of our assets are and where they, that again, like you never know when something's going to fail, and you'd rather fix it the day before it was going to fail. But the only way for us to plan is to use standard replacement time timeframes as a best estimate of when we'll get on things. And so I think if we're applying those, rotely to each of our assets and to say, well, this tank is at exactly that year, that's when we're going to get at it. It would just help us to see everything, how it's tracking forward. And I think will help us do maybe that long-term financial planning that I think it would be wise.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and pull together in a way that is kind of digestible, the various pieces that go into our capital planning and think about how to share that with the board. It's a good comment.
Okay, we have RER, Ed Jameson, then Jack Kenny, please. RER, please.
RER is Roger Roberts.
Ah.
Don't forget to incorporate inflation in all of these estimates going forward, because you can count on inflation. And that means you're saving money if you do something now rather than 10 years from now. So this has been a very good discussion, but I would also add that grants don't come unconditionally. Usually they require funding from bond sources that equal or perhaps exceed the grant. So the grants are not money free. You usually have to provide supplemental bonding in order to get the grant, because they want to see the project completed, not the money just sitting around waiting for you to get around to finding internal capital to match that. So when you're looking at grants, also you need to explain and understand the conditionality associated with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Ed Jameson, please.
Yes, thanks. I have kind of a parenthetical comment about Director Cush's question on the $40 million of extra conservation spending. That's obviously $4 million a year of additional spending. My recollection is that the district estimated that spending about $2 to $2.5 million roughly on conservation presently, and that includes incentives as well as staff time. But you're talking about adding $4 million on top of that. That's like a 2.5 to 3 times increase in the spending on conservation, if I've got my numbers right, of 2 to 2.5 million presently. If not, I apologize. And then finally, I would remind you or reemphasize that we need to not fall back on bond issuances to cover our normal maintenance and repair costs, in my opinion, because it's really critical that we preserve the bond capacity for our production enhancements that we know we have to do, because we're in a critical shortage now. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Jack Kenny, please.
When it comes to how to raise the rates in order to fund projects and maintain our existing infrastructure, there is one thing I would like to note that is better about raising water rates rather than raising flat fees. And while I saw there was the mentioned benefits to raising flat fees, given those are more guaranteed at the margin, one thing to note is raising those flat fees places a lot of cost on lower income, financially sensitive constituents. Whereas when you raise the water rates, it is going to predominantly increase the rates of higher income, less rate sensitive constituents. And on top of that, raising water rates is much more likely to result in an increased motivation for constituents to conserve water and use less and adopt better behaviors given our drought situation. And therefore, there are definitely some benefits to raising water rates rather than meter fees and other flat fees.
Thanks, Mr. Kenny. There are no further speakers.
Okay. Well, I have misplaced my agenda. It was right here, but now it's not. I think that was
It's-
our,
There's one more item, Larry. It's on our on-call pothole contract.
okay,
The review and
yeah.
refer to the board.
Okay. Let's do it.
Great. Thank you, directors. Yes, this is a more routine item for the operations committee to review and refer. And let me introduce Alex Anaya, our engineering manager for design.
Thank you, Crystal. Good morning, directors. I'm Alex Anaya, the engineering manager of the design division. This morning, I'll be presenting the on-call pothole item. So just to briefly explain what is potholing, it's basically a construction process in which a contractor goes out to the road when they USA the road, which means they mark it out to identify the underground utilities. And then over the utility in question, they'll basically cut out a section about 2 feet by 2 feet wide, remove the pavement surface. And then they have this big vacuum excavator truck, which they come in and they vacuum excavate all the aggregate and sand until they reach the utility in question. And then once they reach the utility, they verify it. They verify the location, the size, and the depth of cover to the existing road surface and the pavement thickness, which is all information that is provided to the design engineers afterwards. So once that's done, they'll backfill it, compact it, and then they'll pave it just to make sure they restore the road surface back to existing conditions or prior to the pothole activity. So in addition to that, in recent years, the district has been receiving a growing number of requests from our local jurisdictions within the service area, requesting that the district provide the depth information of our water mains for the road rehabilitation projects. So since the pipelines are underground within the road right of way, the district is obligated to provide this information upon request of the municipalities. In addition to that, the district also uses potholing services for our own capital and fire flow pipeline replacement projects during our design process. And the district advertises roughly about 6 to 8 pipeline projects a year, which require staff to obtain separate potholing contracts for each pipeline projects. And on average, the cost per individual contract is about $10,000 to $15,000. So that averages to around $90,000 a year in potholing work for district pipeline projects alone. So since the nature of the potholing work for the district and municipal requests is the same, executing an on-call contract for this work would streamline the process, saving staff time and providing short turnaround times to provide this information to the requested municipalities and to our district design engineer staff. And so on December 5th, staff issued a request for proposals for a 2-year on-call potholing contract in the amount not to exceed $300,000, which also included an option to extend the contract by 1 year with an additional cost of $150,000 for a total of 3 years and total contract cost of $450,000. But staff would have to return at a future board date to get approval to execute that 3rd-year option. We will be receiving the proposals on January 6th, and we'll be evaluating them for the contract. So district staff is requesting that the operations committee review and refer this item for a contract award at a future regularly scheduled board meeting. And I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Alex. So as Alex said, what we do here, guys, is we need to kick it around. Then I need a motion and a second to push it to the board. It will not be voted on today. So we do it at a later date. That's what this is all about. So with that, any questions?
Yeah, I'm just curious, is the, do we have information on the depth of some mains in specific areas, but less information in others? So we're just trying to fill the information gaps through this exercise?
That is correct, Director Kush. On the most recent installed pipelines, we have pretty good information based on the as-built record data, but this mostly applies to the older pipelines installed in the 20s, 30s, up to the 60s, where there's questionable cover depth information. There's been settlement issues, so there's lots of factors that play into this that make it critical to make sure we have this correct data to avoid any conflicts in the future, both for our projects and the requested municipality.
Thanks, Alex.
There's a GIS system that lays out the entire district. So it's all coordinated. It's just, as Alex said, some spots are a little fuzzier than others.
Yeah, that is correct, Director Russell.
Alex, is So it's $300,000 for a 2-year contract. Is that, do we have, is this kind of an ongoing expense that we're going to have as we do? We just have talked about a lot of improvements that we need to make. Are we basically looking at an average cost of $150,000 a year to do this work? And I'll tell you where I'm going, and so you can tell me if there's a better idea or not, which is like, is there a technology, like I can't help but thinking that we have ways of non-invasively estimating the depth from the road top surface to our pipes. Is there a more expensive technology maybe up front, but yet we could just do the surveying of our district and save some money over time?
That is a great question, Director Schmidt. And yes, there is. There's a technology called ground penetrating radar, which basically uses radar to identify the subsurface utilities. That's a good option to use, but it doesn't work all the times in locations where you have groundwater intrusion, bay mud. You get a lot of static feedback, so you can't really determine the depth. So it is a good technology for a good portion of the work, but it's not a one size fits all for everything. So there would be situations where that technology wouldn't work and we would have to result back to potholing.
Do we have a way do we have a way of knowing, like, would it work for 75% of our area where we're going to need to know? And so is it worth a cost savings? I know there's a penny wise, pound foolish kind of thing that could happen here, which is, but would it make sense for us to figure out, can we use ground penetrating radar in 75% of the locations and bifurcate that out?
Yes,
Alex, we have, I believe Crystal looked into procuring. We don't have ground penetrating radar, but your question is interesting because it came up with staff and we've looked into it, and I think we're moving that direction. Crystal, do you know the latest, or Alex?
Yes, we are researching the device and speaking with manufacturers on the product, and we've actually already identified training and where we will be sending staff off to receive that training and who will be trained. So yeah, we're in the process of purchasing the equipment and getting folks trained up so that we can hopefully avoid some potholes. One pothole is $1,500. So, if we can go out there with a machine and see the depth, that would certainly.
And the approximate cost of the device is what, Crystal?
It's about $26,000 plus the training. I think we have to send folks to Nevada for the training.
Right. So anyway, it's a really good question, Director Schmidt. This is a more cost-effective, non-invasive way. And so we are going to be buying this equipment, and our approach will be hybrid, where we can, we'll use this non-invasive, less expensive with staff, and where we can't, we'll call out the contractor. So really, over time, we'll have a feel of what our actual on-call potholing expenses will be.
Great.
And I think then where it actually came from was the spillway evaluation when we started discussing DPR.
That's right.
So, but do understand, it's not what you think it is. It's not a crystal clear picture underground. It is a very highly interpretive evaluation. It frankly looks like nothing when you look at the screen. It takes an expert to see what it's telling. It's not like a picture of what's underground. So
no, it's kind of like an X-ray.
Or ultrasound, more like an ultrasound.
An ultrasound. Actually,
fuzzier than that.
Yeah. But we're going to have training and learn, and it'll be useful in some instances.
Want a motion, Larry?
Okay, yes, we got to get public comment too, but motion's fine. That's good.
Great. Well, I'll make a motion that we move this item to the board for approval.
Second.
Okay, public comment?
There are none.
Okay, then we're done.
Well, I think we need to vote for it, or do we not?
No
Nope,
vote.
just
No
move.
vote. No.
Not to move it.
Moving it to the board is where the vote occurs.
Sounds good.
So this is just pushing it onto the board. Okay, thank you all.
Have a good weekend, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks.